Welcome. Glad to have you back again as we go through this book of Esther. Where we left off was this, as Haman's in the court. He had just come into the court that morning to see the king about killing Mordecai. The king has not been able to sleep all night long. He couldn't sleep. He's been up. They bring him a scroll, and in this scroll it is the text of Mordecai saving his life. And then the king realizes, I've done nothing for this guy. Who's in the court? They say Haman's in the court. Haman is in the court because he's coming in to tell the king, hey, I've got a 75-foot gallows built to kill this guy, Mordecai. Now, if you remember, the gallows, they didn't hang them like you see in Westerns. It was a pole. They impaled people. He had built a 75-foot impaling rod where he was going to skewer Mordecai. That's what he was there early in the morning for. That's what he was there for. So that's where we're going to pick up. So he said, who's in the inner court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Verse 5. Then the king's servant said to him, Haman is there standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. Basically, the king said, who's in the court? He says, bring him to my bedroom. I don't have time to get my royal gear on and you bring him here. He's impatient. He's wanting to talk to somebody about this. He says, you bring him into my bedroom. I don't have time to go to the court. You bring him to me. So that's what they do. They bring Haman to the bedroom of the king. That's what I said. The setting, last week I told you the setting of this thing is in the king's bedroom. So they bring him in. And then you get verse 6. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, what shall be done for the man who the king delights to honor? So he comes in, and think about this for a second, before Haman can get a word out. Haman has prepared. He got there early. He was the first one in court. He was wanted to be the first ones to show up and get the business of the day underway, and that was to kill Mordecai. He gets there early, and the king doesn't even give him a chance to open his mouth. Look, he gets in the bedroom, and the king immediately says this. He says, what shall be done for the man who the king delights to honor? Haman, what would you suggest I do for somebody that I want to honor? What do you suggest I give the guy that I want to honor? What do you think, if you were King Haman, what would you do if you wanted to honor somebody? That's what he's asking. That's what he's asking. Haman, if you want to honor somebody, what would you do? Now, I want you to imagine Haman at this point in time when we read this. The king has just asked him, what shall be done for a man whom the king delights to honor? Haman, what should I do for somebody that I want to honor? Haman, what would you do if you wanted to honor somebody, Haman? Look at the end of the verse. Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king like to honor more than me? Haman thought the king was talking about Haman. He thought the king was talking about himself. He thought that it was all about him. Do you see that? It says, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? I'm the guy that honors. I'm the guy that delights the king more than anybody. He's talking about me. He is actually talking about me. He is asking me what I want. That's what he was thinking. The king is asking me, what do you want? I delight in you. What do you want? Anything you want, I will give to you. Now, what you have in verse 6, if you've got your Bibles, look in verse 6 because you're going to see something. You're going to actually see the heart of Haman. Look what it says in verse 6. Now Haman thought in his heart. We actually get to see an inside view of Haman. And what you're going to find is that he's egotistical and he is very, very, very prideful. Now, once again, can you imagine Haman at this moment? The king says, I want to honor somebody, and in his heart, he says, well, it's got to be me. It's got to be me. It's got to. Why would he honor anybody? You don't think this guy thinks a lot of himself, do you? It's amazing. And you see this prideful, egotistical man. You see that Haman thinks in his heart. Haman thought in his heart. He thought he was talking about him. So let me tell you what. He thinks the king is thinking about him. And guess what he is really wanting? He is fixing to literally pour it on here. He is. He is fixing to literally pour it on. He is standing there and thinking to himself, who delights in the king? I'm the only one that delights the king. He is talking about me. He's talking about me. It's got to be me he's talking about. What do I want? Anything that what do I do for someone he's asking me anything I want to do, I get. Now that's what's going through his mind. Look in verse 7. Now he is really going to pour it on thick here. He really is. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Now I told you, Haman really pours it on right here. He thinks that he's talking about himself. He thinks he's fixing to get all this. So just look what Haman wants. He wants to wear the king's robe. He says, I want to wear a robe that the king has worn. I want a royal robe. Then he comes back and he says, I want to ride the horse the king rides. I want a royal horse. Now you look at that verse and you see, and a horse which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. He's talking about the horse. In Persia, they would put crowns on horses. That would show the people that's the king's horse. That horse belongs to the king. He says, I want to ride the king's horse. The third thing he says is this. I want the highest nobleman in the entire kingdom to come in and dress me in this robe, put me on this horse, and then lead me through the city, proclaiming, I'm the guy the king delights to honor. That's what he wanted. Let me tell you something. Old Haman asked for everything but the golden scepter that we've seen. He asked for everything. He said, I want to dress like a king. I want to ride like a king. I want to be proclaimed as king. As a king would. I think he wants to be king. I think you look at this, I think you see the heart of Haman. I think Haman wants to be king. I think he wants the throne. Look, he wants to dress the part, he wants to ride the part, and he wants to be magnified like the part. I think he really wants to be king. So that's what he said. I told you he really pours it on. He pours it on right here. This is what he told the king. Hey, we need to get one of your robes that you wear, and we need to put it on me. We need to get the horse that you ride with a crown on his head and put me on it. And then we need to get the highest noble in the land to proclaim all through the city square as he leads me through on this horse that I'm the guy in whom the king delights. Well, that's what he wants. thinks pretty high of himself. You see the pride and the arrogance here. Can I just tell you something? Haman appears to be serving the king, but he's actually serving himself. He wants all this done to him. Look in verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." Now let me just tell you, wouldn't you have liked to seen Haman's face when Haman is sitting there thinking all this time, it's me, it's me, it's me, it's me, it's me, I'm going to get what I want, and all of a sudden the king says, "Hurry, you take the robe, you take the horse, you go and you do everything that you said to Mordecai the Jew, the guy he was originally there that morning to see if he could kill." How would you like to see Haman's face? I bet he was white as a ghost. How can you imagine how he felt? I bet he was about to pass out. Can you imagine? You got to sit here and go, did he really, King, did you really just say that? Did I hear you right? Did you say Mordecai the Jew? I want this guy killed. I want this guy dead. Are you sure that are you sure about this? Am I hearing you right? Now look, one of the things that you need to make note of, do you remember when Haman wanted the highest ranking nobleman to do all this, to dress him, to put him on the horse, to lead the horse through the city square, and then to proclaim, "This is the man whom..." Guess who the highest ranking nobleman is? Haman. Guess who's got to do all this for Mordecai? Haman. So Haman's got to go, and he's got to put the robe on Mordecai. He's got to put Mordecai on the king's horse. He's got to proclaim throughout the whole city, Mordecai's the guy in whom the king delights. The whole time doing this for his enemy, the guy he hated, the guy he wanted dead just a little bit earlier this morning. Look at the Bible. Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse, and as you have suggested, do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone, all that you have spoken." So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on the horse back through the city square, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Now, I would have loved to seen Haman's face, how he reacted. I would have loved to seen how Haman was sitting there and what he did when he put the robe on. Did he really proclaim? He had to do what the king said, so he had to proclaim it. Now, look what happens here in verse 11. He done all that, and then you get to verse 12, and it says, "And Mordecai, after all this, after all that happened, after Mordecai was dressed with the robe, after Mordecai was put on the horse, after Mordecai was paraded around town, after Mordecai was said, 'This is the guy in whom the king likes,'" look what Mordecai does. Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate. After all of this, Mordecai goes back to work. He goes back to work. He goes back to the king. He don't throw a party for himself like Haman did in chapter 5. He don't sit here and celebrate in his greatness like Haman's been doing in chapter 5. He's not puffed up with ego or pride like Haman is in chapter 5 and chapter 6. He goes back to work. This speaks to his humility. Look what it says. Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning and with his head covered. This tore him up. He went to kill. Hours before, he was going to be on a spike, 75 foot high, dead. And now I had to take and lead him. I had to dress him in a king's robe, put him in a king's horse, drag him around the city, proclaim, "This guy is who the king wants to honor." Now, here's Zeresh, his wife again. Let me just show you something real quick, and I'll close. When Haman told his wife, Zeresh, all his friends, that had happened to him, what had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, now listen, it sounds like she's almost a prophet here. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, Haman, you've already begun to fall. You're already in trouble, buddy. Honey, you're already fallen before him. You're already beginning to fall. Look what she said. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, I can see it, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall. She says, sweetie, if he's a Jew, you don't stand a chance. Do you know what it's almost like she's saying? It's almost like she's saying Genesis 12, when God tells to Abram, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Now, I don't know if she knew that or not, but I'm telling you, it's almost like that's what she says right here. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, look in verse 14. While they were still talking with him, the king eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So while all this is going on, while he comes to the house mourning with his head covered, he is whooped. He is just absolutely devastated. He tells his wife, he tells his wise men, he tells his friend all that happened. She comes and says, look, you've already begun to fall, and if this Mordecai is a Jew, you will fall. Hey, Haman, it's time for the banquet the queen has time to throw. And you know what that means. Well, we'll pick it up back next week. Thank you for tuning in. God bless you. Have a great week.